This is her home now. You're not welcome here anymore. My husband of 12 years said that to my face, standing in my own doorway, blocking my path, while a strange woman stood behind him, wearing my robe, holding my coffee mug, watching me like I was the intruder. I had just driven 6 hours home from caring for my sick mother. My suitcase was still in my hand. My key had stopped working. And Aaron, the man I had given everything to, my money, my trust, my best years, smiled at me like he had already won. He had no idea what he had just started. If this story speaks to you, please hit that subscribe button right now and follow all the way to the end, because I promise you, what happens next will shock you. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not a dramatic woman. I have never been the type to yell in parking lots, or cry in grocery stores, or throw dishes across a kitchen floor. For 51 years, I had kept myself composed. I had been the steady one, the calm one, the woman people called when they needed someone to think clearly under pressure. My mother raised me to be dignified. My father raised me to be strong. And for 12 years, I had poured every drop of that dignity and strength into my marriage, into my home, into a life I genuinely believed was good. So when I say that what happened that afternoon broke something open inside me, something I didn't even know could break, I need you to understand the weight of those words. It started 3 days before, when my mother called me from her house in Cincinnati. She had fallen getting out of the bathtub. Nothing broken, the doctors said, but she was shaken and sore and scared, and she needed me. I didn't even hesitate. I packed a bag within the hour. Aaron was in the living room watching television when I came downstairs with my suitcase. "Mom needs me," I said. "I'm going to stay with her for a few days, maybe through the weekend." He didn't look up from the screen. "Okay." "Okay," I repeated. "That's all? No, I hope she's all right? No, drive safe?" He glanced over his shoulder at me then, and I remember thinking, not for the first time, that his eyes looked tired. Not tired from lack of sleep. Tired of me. "She'll be fine, Rachel. She always is. Drive safe." And then he turned back to the TV. I told myself it was nothing. He was just in one of his moods. Aaron had always run hot and cold, weeks of warmth followed by stretches of distance that I had learned, over the years, to simply wait out. I kissed the top of his head, even though he didn't move toward me, even though his eyes never left the screen. I told him I loved him. He said, "Mm-hmm." I picked up my keys, and I drove to Cincinnati. My mother was fine. Shaken, like I said, but fine. We spent 3 days together, cooking her meals, watching her programs, talking about things we hadn't talked about in years. She asked me how Aaron was. I told her he was wonderful. I don't know why I said that. Maybe because I had been saying it for so long that it came out automatically. Maybe because somewhere deep down, I still wanted it to be true. I left Cincinnati on a Sunday afternoon. The drive home was peaceful, uneventful. I remember listening to an old Patsy Cline record on the radio and thinking that everything was going to be okay. That I would get home, Aaron and I would have dinner, maybe even a real conversation, and things would slowly come back to the warmth they used to have. I was thinking about what I would make for dinner when I pulled into our driveway. The house looked the same. Brick front, the azalea bushes I had planted 3 years ago along the walkway, the porch swing Aaron had installed as a birthday surprise for me back when he still did things like that. Everything exactly as I had left it. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and walked up to the front door. The key didn't work. I stood there for a long moment, genuinely confused. I tried again, more carefully. I pulled the key out and examined it. It was the right one. I recognized the small scratch along the edge from when I had dropped it in the parking lot of the grocery store last spring. I put it back in the lock and turned it both ways. Nothing. The lock wouldn't catch. My first thought was that the lock was broken, jammed maybe. Aaron was always saying he needed to replace it. I knocked. 30 seconds. A minute. I knocked again, harder. When the door finally opened, Aaron was standing there in a t-shirt and jeans, and he was, and this is the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I cannot get out of my memory no matter how hard I try. He was smiling. Not the warm, easy smile of a man happy to see his wife. It was a different kind of smile. Satisfied. Prepared. "Hey," he said. "The key isn't working," I said. "Is the lock broken?" "No." He leaned against the doorframe, one arm up, blocking the entrance in a way that I registered, but didn't yet understand. "It's not broken." "Then what?" And that's when I saw her. She appeared from somewhere behind him, from the direction of the kitchen, I think, and she was wearing my robe, the white terry cloth one with the blue stitching on the pocket that I had bought from a boutique in Nashville on a work trip 4 years ago. She was holding a coffee mug in both hands, and she was young, 20-something, maybe 30, and she looked at me with an expression that I will never, ever forget. Not embarrassment, not guilt, not shock, but a kind of calculated calm, like she had been briefed, like she had known this moment was coming and had decided in advance exactly what face to wear. "Aaron," I said. My voice came out very quiet. "Who is that?" "This is Tiffany," he said. He didn't say it like a confession. He said it like an introduction. "Why is she wearing my robe?" He shifted his weight. "It's not your robe anymore, Rachel." I actually laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out. A short, disbelieving sound. "Excuse me?" "I changed the locks," he said. "I've been meaning to tell you, but you changed the locks on our house?" "My house," he said. And there it was. No softening, no apology, no build-up. Just those 2 words, flat and final, like he'd rehearsed them. "This is my house, and you're not welcome here anymore." The world tilted. I know that sounds like something out of a novel, but I promise you that is the only way I can describe it. The actual physical sensation of my reality shifting underneath me, like the ground had become something unstable. I looked at my husband of 12 years standing in the doorway of the home we had bought together, signed the papers together, painted the walls together, and the man looking back at me might as well have been a stranger. "Aaron," I said slowly, "step aside and let me into my house." "I already told you, step aside." "Rachel, don't make a scene. You changed the locks." My voice cracked on that last word, and I hated it. Hated the way it exposed exactly how close I was to the edge. "You changed the locks on our house while I was taking care of my mother, and you're standing there with her, and you're telling me this is your house? Have you lost your mind?" "The house is in my name," he said. And he said it with such ease, such confidence, that it was clear he had thought about this moment, had planned it, had probably sat at that kitchen table with Tiffany and worked out exactly what he was going to say when I showed up. "It's been in my name since we bought it, which means I have the right to decide who lives here and who doesn't. We are married, Aaron. For now." Those 2 words hit me like a physical blow. For now. I stared at him. He met my eyes without flinching. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," he continued, and his voice was almost gentle now, which was somehow worse. "You can arrange to collect the rest of your things later in the week. I'd recommend you find somewhere to stay tonight, a hotel, or—" "I'm not going to a hotel." I stepped toward the door. "I live here." He moved to fill the space. "Not anymore." "Aaron, I swear to God, don't," he said. And something in his voice sharpened then, something that I recognized from our worst arguments, the low warning in it that had, in years past, made me step back, soften my tone, find a way to de-escalate. For 12 years, that tone had worked on me. For 12 years, I had retreated from it, told myself I was being the bigger person, the rational one, the one who kept things from spiraling. I did not step back. "You are going to let me into this house," I said, "or I am going to call the police." He actually laughed. "Go ahead. The deed is in my name. They can't do anything. And then, and this is the moment that I think about when I need to remember how far I've come. He reached inside the doorway, picked up my suitcase, and set it on the porch beside me. Like I was a package being returned. Like 12 years of my life fit neatly into that single gesture. I heard laughter from inside the house, Tiffany's voice calling something toward the back rooms. Like I was already gone. Like I had already ceased to exist. "I'll have someone reach out about your things," Aaron said, and he closed the door. I stood on my porch, the one I had swept and planted and maintained for a decade, with my suitcase beside me and the sound of my own heartbeat so loud in my ears that for a moment I couldn't hear anything else. The neighbors across the street, the Hendersons, a retired couple who had watched Aaron and me move in, who had come to our 4th of July parties and accepted our Christmas cards every year, were standing at their living room window. Mrs. Henderson had her hand over her mouth. I picked up my suitcase. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and I did not start the engine for a very long time. My phone was in my hand before I knew I'd picked it up. I called the only person I could think to call. Emma answered on the second ring. "How was Cincinnati? How's your mom?" I opened my mouth to say something reasonable. What came out was, "He locked me out of the house." Silence. Then, "He what?" "Aaron, he changed the locks while I was gone. He's got a woman in there, Emma. She's wearing my robe. He told me it's his house, that he spoke to a lawyer, that I need to find a hotel." "Okay." Emma's voice went very calm and very focused, the way it always did when a real problem arrived. And that focus, the sound of someone thinking clearly on my behalf when I couldn't, cracked me open. I started crying then, ugly, heaving, gasping tears that I was furious at myself for and completely unable to stop. "Rachel," Emma said. "Rachel, listen to me. Are you in your car?" "Yes." "Are you okay to drive?" I wiped my face with the back of my hand. "I don't know." "Then you're not driving anywhere yet. You're going to sit there for 5 minutes and you're going to breathe. And then you are going to drive straight to my house. You hear me?" "Emma, he said the deed is in his name. He said the police can't—" "He said wrong," Emma said. And her voice was so certain, so absolutely unmoved by any doubt whatsoever, that I held onto it like a rope. "You paid for half of that house, Rachel. More than half. I watched you do it. You have bank records. You have payment histories. You have emails and texts, and I know for a fact that you have records of every single improvement you've ever made to that property. The deed might have his name on it, but property law is not that simple, and Aaron apparently hired the dumbest lawyer on the planet if he thinks it is." I breathed. "Now," Emma said, "are you breathing?" "Trying." "Try harder, and then come to my house. We are going to figure this out tonight." I sat in that car for another 10 minutes. I watched the lights in my house, warm amber light coming from the living room windows, the kitchen, my kitchen, the one I had remodeled 3 years ago with the countertops I had spent weeks choosing. I thought about the 12 years that lived inside those walls. I thought about the savings I had poured into that mortgage. I thought about my name, which was not on that deed, which Aaron had insisted at the time of purchase didn't matter because what's mine is yours and what's yours is mine. Isn't that how marriage works? And then I thought about the look on his face when he set my suitcase on the porch, the ease of it, the absence of guilt or hesitation, the absolute certainty that I would simply accept what he had done and walk away. Something happened in me then that I cannot fully explain. It wasn't rage, though rage was certainly part of it. It was something quieter and colder and far more dangerous. It was the feeling of a decision being made, not deliberated, not agonized over, but simply made, the way a door closes, solid and final, on something that is finished. Aaron thought he had won. He thought he had calculated this perfectly, that because his name was on the deed, he had all the power. He thought that 12 years of my money and my work and my love could be dismissed with a changed lock and a closed door. He thought I was the kind of woman who would stand there in her driveway, cry a little, and then quietly disappear. He did not know me at all. I started the car. I drove to Emma's house, and by the time I got there, I wasn't crying anymore. Emma had coffee ready. She also had a legal pad, a pen, and a laptop open on her kitchen table. And when I walked through her door, she didn't ask me again how I was feeling. She just said, "Sit down, tell me everything. Start with the house purchase." So I did. I told her everything I could remember about the day we bought the house. The mortgage meetings, the paperwork, the title company. I told her that at the time, Aaron had suggested putting the deed in his name alone because, he had argued, it simplified things administratively and had something to do with his credit score. He had been charming about it. He had framed it as a practical decision, not a power play. I had been 28 years old and in love, and I had trusted him completely. "But you paid the mortgage?" Emma asked, writing. "Half of it, every month, automatic transfer from my account, for 12 years. You have records of that?" "I have every bank statement going back to the day we moved in." "What about the renovation?" "The kitchen," I thought for a moment. "I paid for almost all of that myself. Aaron's business had a bad year, and we agreed that I would cover it. I have all the contractor invoices. They're on my email." Emma was nodding, writing fast. "What else? Any other major expenditures on the house that came from your accounts?" "The HVAC replacement, the roof repair in 2019, the landscaping." I was starting to remember all of it now, years of payments surfacing in my memory, one after another, like files being pulled from a cabinet. "Emma, I have spent probably $150,000 on that house over 12 years. "And Aaron?" I thought about it honestly. "Less. His business has always been uneven. There were years he contributed more and years he contributed almost nothing. Probably 60 or 70,000 total from him, maybe less." Emma set down her pen and looked at me. "Rachel, he doesn't have the leverage he thinks he has. But if his name is on the deed, his name being on the deed establishes his legal ownership of record. It does not override your right to the property as a marital asset. Everything purchased or substantially financed during the marriage is subject to equitable distribution. And if you can demonstrate that you were the primary financial contributor to that property, a judge is going to take a very hard look at who actually has a right to it." She paused. "Plus, there's something called unlawful exclusion of a spouse. What he did tonight, changing those locks, physically preventing you from entering your marital home, that is a legal issue. That is something a court will care about very much." I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I hadn't slept properly since my mother's call 3 days earlier. I was sitting in my best friend's kitchen with nothing to my name except the suitcase I had packed for a 3-day visit and a growing mountain of rage that I was slowly learning to aim. "Tell me what I need to do." "First thing tomorrow morning," Emma said, "we find you a lawyer." I barely slept that night. I lay in Emma's guest room and stared at the ceiling and had the same thought over and over on a loop. The robe. My white robe with the blue stitching. Tiffany was wearing my robe. How long had this been going on? How many mornings had she been in my kitchen while I was at work? How many evenings had Aaron told me he was staying late at the office while she was in my house, sleeping in my bed, wearing my things? I thought about small moments from the past year that suddenly looked different. Aaron being distant, distracted, irritable. Aaron working later than usual, traveling more. Aaron flinching slightly when I reached for his phone. I had explained all of it away because that was what I did. I was the woman who kept things from spiraling, who gave the benefit of the doubt, who believed in her husband because the alternative was a terror I couldn't face. I faced it now, in Emma's guest room at 2 a.m. I let myself look directly at the thing I had been not looking at for however long it had been growing. and it was every bit as awful as I had feared. But it was also, in a strange way, clarifying. There was nothing left to protect. There was nothing left to lose. I picked up my phone and opened my email. I started going through every invoice, every bank statement, every contractor receipt I had ever saved. I was still going when the sun came up. Emma found me at her kitchen table at 6 a.m, surrounded by printed pages. She poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of me, and said nothing for a moment. Then, "How much?" $162,000, I said. "That's just what I can document from emails. The rest is in the bank statements." She sat down across from me. "Rachel, he walked into a fight he did not prepare for." I looked up from the papers. I felt something then. Not joy, not happiness, nothing so light as that, but something solid and quiet and deeply certain settling into the center of my chest. "Then let's make sure he knows it." Emma had a contact, a woman she had worked with years ago who had since become a family law attorney. Her name was Patricia, and Emma texted her at 6:45 that morning with a message that said only, "My best friend needs help. Urgent. It's bad." Patricia called back within the hour. I told her the story, everything, start to finish. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, the first thing she said was, "He changed the locks on the marital home while you were out of state caring for an ill parent?" "Yes." "And then he physically prevented you from entering and placed your luggage outside?" "Yes." A pause. "Mrs. Morrison, I want to be honest with you. Your husband has made several significant legal errors here. His confidence appears to be based on the assumption that the deed in his name gives him complete control over the property. That is not how marital property law works in this state, and the manner in which he excluded you from the home, particularly the circumstances of it, is exactly the kind of thing that judges respond to very strongly." "Can I get back in?" I asked. "Can you actually get me back into my house?" "I can file an emergency motion for exclusive possession of the marital residence," she said. "Given what you've described and the documentation you have, I believe we have a strong case for that motion. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen quickly." "How quickly?" "Days," she said, "not weeks." I looked at Emma across the table. She was watching me. I reached across and squeezed her hand once, hard, and then I turned my attention back to the phone in my other hand, to Patricia's clear and capable voice, to the machinery of justice that Aaron had never once considered. "Tell me what you need from me," I said. Patricia told me. I wrote everything down. She needed the bank statements, the mortgage payment records, the contractor invoices, any communication between Aaron and me that could establish a pattern of shared financial responsibility for the property. She also needed my marriage certificate, our joint tax filings for the past several years, and any evidence I could gather of Aaron's recent behavior, the changed locks, any texts or emails he might have sent me about the situation, anything that documented his attempt to remove me from the marital home. I had almost all of it already. The rest I could get within 24 hours. "Mrs. Morrison," Patricia said just before we hung up, "I want you to understand something. What your husband did was not just cruel, it was legally reckless. He seems to believe that he holds all the power in this situation, and I suspect that belief is what's making him careless. That carelessness is going to cost him." After I hung up, Emma sat back in her chair and looked at me with an expression I recognized, the one she wore when she was trying to read me, when she wasn't sure whether I was holding up or falling apart. "I'm okay," I said. And for the first time since I had stood on my porch with a useless key, it was actually true. "What do you need?" she asked. I looked down at the pile of documents in front of me. $162,000 of evidence that this was my home. "I need a scanner," I said, "and more coffee. And then I need to call my mother." Emma stood up. "I'll get the scanner. You call your mom." I called my mother. She answered on the first ring, the way she always did when she knew something was wrong, which was most of the time. "Rachel," she said, "what happened?" I told her. I kept my voice even. I did not cry, though her silence on the other end of the line, that particular silence that mothers have, the one that contains every emotion they are choosing not to say aloud, came very close to undoing me. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are your father's daughter." "Mom, your father did not let a single person take a single thing from him in his entire life," she said. "And neither will you. You hear me?" "I hear you." "Good." A brief pause. "Do you have a lawyer?" "I do now." "Good," she said again. And then, quieter, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Come home when this is done. We'll celebrate." I spent the rest of that day at Emma's kitchen table, scanning documents, organizing files, building a case. Every bank statement, every invoice, every email in which Aaron and I had discussed the mortgage, the renovations, the finances of our shared life. I found emails going back 10 years. Aaron asking me to cover the HVAC because things were tight right now. Aaron thanking me for handling the roof. Aaron discussing the kitchen renovation budget with the contractor while copying me on every decision because, as he had said at the time, "You're the one with the eye for this stuff, honey." Each one I filed into a folder Patricia had given me. Each one was a brick. By evening, I had sent Patricia everything she needed. She emailed back within an hour. "This is excellent documentation. We will file first thing tomorrow." I put down my phone. Emma set a plate of food in front of me. I hadn't eaten all day, and sat down across from me. "How are you really?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. "Angry," I said, "deeply, profoundly angry. But not scared. I'm not scared anymore." Emma nodded slowly. "That's different from this morning." This morning, I was standing on my own porch being told I didn't belong there. I picked up my fork. Now I have a lawyer and $162,000 in documented contributions to my own marital home. And Aaron is sitting in my kitchen thinking he's won. I looked up at her. He has no idea what's coming. Emma smiled. It was the kind of smile that made me feel, for the first time in 2 days, that the ground was solid under my feet again. "No," she said, "he really doesn't." That night, Aaron texted me for the first time since he had closed the door in my face. The message was 4 words long. "Don't make this difficult." I read it twice. I thought about 12 years. I thought about the mortgage payments and the renovation checks and the trust I had handed him without reservation. I thought about the white robe with the blue stitching on the pocket. I thought about Patricia's voice on the phone saying, "He seems to believe that he holds all the power in this situation." I did not respond. I set the phone face down on the nightstand, lay back on Emma's guest bed, and for the first time in days, I slept. Patricia called me at 8:47 the next morning, and the first thing she said was, "We have a problem." I sat up straight in Emma's guest bed, my coffee already cooling on the nightstand. "What kind of problem?" "I pulled the full property record this morning before filing," she said. "The deed is in Aaron's name alone, which we already knew. But there's a second document attached to the title, a quitclaim deed, signed approximately 14 months ago. Rachel, did you sign anything related to the house in the past year or two? Any document Aaron might have asked you to sign without explaining fully what it was?" My stomach dropped. What does a quitclaim deed do? It transfers ownership rights. If Aaron had you sign one, it could complicate our argument about your equitable interest in the property significantly. A pause. "Did you sign anything?" I pressed my fingers to my forehead and tried to think. 14 months ago. What had happened 14 months ago? I had been buried in a project at work, a particularly brutal quarter that had kept me at the office until 9 or 10 most nights for weeks. Aaron had handled a lot of the household paperwork during that stretch. He'd always been the one to manage what he called the administrative side of things, the HOA forms and the insurance renewals, and then something surfaced, like a splinter working its way out. There was a refinance, I said slowly. He told me we were refinancing to get a better rate. There was a stack of papers. I signed them at the kitchen table one night when I was exhausted. He said it was just routine mortgage paperwork. Silence on Patricia's end. Then, Rachel, I need you to try to remember. Was there a notary present? Yes, a woman. She came to the house. I didn't know her. And Aaron told you the documents were related to a refinance. He said it was routine. He had the pages flagged with those little sticky arrows. I just signed where the arrows were. I didn't read every page. I was so tired, Patricia. It was 11 at night, and I had been at work since 7 in the morning, and he said... My voice broke on that, and I stopped and breathed and started again. He said it was just routine. Another silence, and in that silence, I heard everything Patricia was not yet saying. Then, I need to get the full document from the recorder's office today. Don't panic yet. Even if you did sign a quitclaim, there are arguments available to us regarding fraud, coercion, and lack of informed consent. If he misrepresented the nature of the documents to you, that is potentially actionable. But I need to see the paperwork first. Can you get me the name of the mortgage company he claimed was handling the refinance? I didn't know it. I told her I would try to find it. I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of the guest bed and stared at the wall. Emma was at the door within seconds. She had been awake. She had heard the tone of my voice through the wall. "Tell me," she said. I told her. I watched her face go through several stages: confusion, then understanding, then a cold, focused anger that was almost more frightening than panic. "He set you up," she said, 14 months ago. "Rachel, he's been planning this." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. I felt the ripples move through me, and I sat with them for a moment, because they required sitting with. My husband, the man I had shared a bed with for 12 years, the man who had held my hand in the waiting room when my father was dying, the man I had trusted so completely that I had signed documents without reading them at 11 o'clock at night, had been planning to take my house for over a year. He was seeing her before that, I said. It wasn't a question. It was a calculation. He was already with Tiffany when he had me sign those papers. He was already building his exit. Emma sat down beside me. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, "Rachel, how much money do you have in accounts that are only in your name?" I thought about it. My personal checking, my work retirement account, a savings account I opened about 3 years ago. It started as an emergency fund. I've been putting a little into it every month. How much is in it now? About $40,000. Emma exhaled. Okay, that's good. That's important. First thing today, before anything else, you need to contact your bank and make sure Aaron has no access to any account in your name. If he knew about the savings account, he might try to move on it. I hadn't even thought of that. I reached for my phone immediately and called my bank. The representative confirmed that my personal accounts were in my name only, that Aaron was not listed as a co-owner or beneficiary. I stayed on the line long enough to change my online banking password and add a verbal security code. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the particular adrenaline of realizing how many moves were being played simultaneously in a game I had only just realized I was in. Emma was right. This wasn't a sudden, impulsive act. Aaron hadn't come home one day and decided on a whim to lock me out and install his girlfriend in my robe. He had been constructing this for over a year. The quitclaim document, the timing, waiting until I was out of state, emotionally occupied with my mother, unlikely to have a lawyer on speed dial. The lawyer he claimed to have already consulted. All of it. This was architecture. This was a plan. And I had been living inside it without knowing, going to work and paying the mortgage and cooking dinner and sleeping beside him while he laid every brick in place. I called Patricia back with the name of the mortgage company. I had found an old email with a company letterhead that Aaron had forwarded to me during the supposed refinance process. She said she'd have more information within a few hours. I told her about the savings account, about my documentation, about the timeline I was beginning to put together. "Patricia," I said, "is it possible to prove that he had me sign that document under false pretenses?" "Misrepresentation in the signing of a legal document is absolutely a legal argument," she said carefully. "The question is evidence. Did he send you any emails, any texts, any written communication in which he described the documents you were signing as refinance paperwork?" I went to my email right then, searching. It took me 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I counted, because counting kept me calm. And then I found it, an email from Aaron sent to me at 9:53 p.m. on a Thursday 14 months ago, with the subject line, "Refi paperwork tomorrow night, notary confirmed for 8 p.m. The body of the email said, "Hey, the notary is coming tomorrow to finalize the refinancing. Should be quick, maybe 20 minutes. I'll have everything ready when you get home. Love you." I read it 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Patricia with a single line. Found it. Her response came back in under 10 minutes. "This is significant. Do not delete anything. Keep searching." I kept searching. And what I found over the next 2 hours, sitting at Emma's kitchen table with my phone and her laptop and a notepad filling up with dates and dollar amounts, was the slow, methodical unraveling of a lie I had been living inside for longer than I had wanted to admit. There were other emails. A text in which Aaron had referenced the monthly payment going down after the refinance, when in fact the mortgage payment had not changed at all. A note in our shared calendar, which Aaron had clearly forgotten I still had access to, that said simply, on the day of the notary's visit, "Quinn, 8 p.m., quitclaim." Quinn had been the notary. Quitclaim had been the document. He had put it in the calendar like a dentist appointment. I stared at that calendar entry for a long time. Then I screenshotted it and sent it to Patricia. Her call came 3 minutes later. "Rachel," she said, and her voice had changed. It had acquired a new quality, something sharper and more energized. "I have the document from the recorder's office. You did sign a quitclaim deed. But based on what you've just sent me, the email, the calendar entry, we have a clear paper trail indicating that Aaron explicitly misrepresented the nature of those documents to you. That is fraud. Not metaphorical fraud, actual, documentable, legally actionable fraud." She paused. "This changes things considerably. Good or bad?" "Good," she said. "Significantly good. A quitclaim signed under fraudulent misrepresentation can be challenged and potentially voided. If we can demonstrate to a court that you signed that document believing it to be mortgage refinance paperwork and that Aaron deliberately concealed its true nature, we have grounds not just to contest the exclusion from the home, but to challenge his ownership claim directly." Another pause. "We're filing today. Emergency motion for exclusive possession of the marital residence, plus a motion to void the quitclaim based on fraud. I'm also going to recommend we file for a temporary restraining order to prevent Aaron from transferring, selling, or encumbering the property in any way while the case is pending." I was gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles had gone white. "What do I need to do right now?" "Continue what you're doing. Send me everything you find. I'll need your signature on the filings by 3 o'clock this afternoon." A brief pause, and then she said something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Rachel, your husband thought he had thought of everything. He didn't think of you." Emma drove me to Patricia's office that afternoon. I signed the documents, initialed where indicated, provided Patricia with the full folder of evidence I had been assembling since the night before. Patricia's office was calm and ordered in a way that steadied me. Books lined up by category, files in labeled rows, everything in its place. She sat across from me in a suit the color of charcoal and looked at me over the paperwork with the kind of direct, unhurried attention that good lawyers give to situations they intend to win. "I want you to understand what the next few days will look like," she said. "The emergency motion will be filed today. Because you've been physically excluded from your marital home, we have strong grounds for the court to expedite a hearing. I expect to have a date within 48 to 72 hours. Once we're in front of a judge, I will present the financial documentation, the email trail regarding the quitclaim, and the circumstances of your exclusion. Aaron will have the opportunity to respond. His position is going to be that the deed represents legal ownership and that the quitclaim was a legitimate document you signed willingly. And our response is that he lied to get my signature. Exactly, and we have the paper trail to support it. She folded her hands on the desk. There's also the question of your joint finances. You mentioned that you have a joint savings account with Aaron in addition to your personal accounts? I had almost forgotten about the joint account. Yes, we've had it since we got married. It's where we kept shared household funds, mortgage, utilities, things like that. I'd recommend you check the current balance immediately, Patricia said. If Aaron has already taken steps to transfer or drain that account, we'll want to know as soon as possible, because it will be relevant to our filing. I pulled out my phone right there in her office and logged into the joint account. For a moment, I thought I had navigated to the wrong account. The number on the screen didn't make sense. I checked it again. I read the transaction history. My mouth went very dry. Patricia, I said, the joint account had about $80,000 in it when I left for Cincinnati 3 days ago. And now? I turned the phone so she could see the screen. The balance was $412. The transaction history showed a series of transfers. 2 days ago, the day after I had left for my mother's, moving the funds in increments to an account I didn't recognize. Patricia looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she looked up at me. He moved $80,000 the day after you left. The day after I left to take care of my sick mother, I said. My voice was perfectly flat. I had gone past the place where my voice shook. I had arrived at a different place entirely, colder, quieter, absolutely clear. He waited until I was out of the house, and he moved $80,000. Patricia reached for her legal pad. This is no longer just a property dispute, she said. What you're describing, the fraudulent quitclaim, the unauthorized transfer of marital funds, these are potentially criminal matters in addition to the civil case. I want to loop in a colleague of mine who handles financial fraud, with your permission. Do it, I said. Emma was waiting in the lobby when I came out of Patricia's office. She looked at my face and stood up immediately. What happened? He took the money too, I said. The joint account, $80,000. He moved it the day I drove to Cincinnati. Emma went very still. It was the stillness of someone processing something so far beyond ordinary betrayal that ordinary language doesn't reach it. Then she said, quietly, but with a ferocity that I felt in my chest, that man has no idea who he has declared war on. The 48 hours that followed were some of the strangest of my life. I was living in a guest room with a single suitcase, my whole world reduced to what I had packed for a 3-day trip. Every morning I woke up for a moment not knowing where I was, and then I remembered, and the remembering was its own small violence. But I kept moving. That was the only option. Keep moving, keep building the case, keep adding bricks. Patricia filed the emergency motion. She filed the fraud challenge against the quitclaim. She filed to freeze any remaining joint assets. Her financial fraud colleague, a quietly intense man named David, who wore the expression of someone who had seen every financial crime imaginable and was not particularly surprised by any of them, began tracing where the $80,000 had gone. It took David less than a day to find it. He called me on the second morning with the information in his usual calm, matter-of-fact tone, like he was reporting on the weather. The funds were transferred to a personal account in the name of Tiffany Laurel Marsh, he said. The account was opened approximately 11 months ago. I've also identified what appears to be a pattern of smaller transfers from the joint account going back approximately 18 months. Consistent amounts, roughly $1,500 to $2,000 per month, to the same account. 18 months. 18 months of money leaving our joint account, going directly to Tiffany. I had not noticed because I had trusted him. Because I had rarely looked at the joint account closely, Aaron handled the household bills, and I had checked the balance occasionally but never scrutinized the transaction history. Because I had believed with the entirety of my being that the man I was married to was not doing this. How much total? I asked. Including the lump transfer from 3 days ago, approximately $114,000. $114,000, paid to his girlfriend from our shared money over a year and a half, while I was at work, while I was paying half the mortgage, while I was signing documents he told me were routine. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "What does this mean, legally?" "It means he's exposed," David said simply. "Marital funds transferred without spousal consent to a third party, particularly a romantic partner, is textbook dissipation of marital assets. It's also potentially criminal, depending on how the DA wants to look at it. But even in the purely civil context, this documentation will significantly strengthen your property case. A judge looking at this pattern of behavior is going to view Aaron's overall conduct very differently than he might have otherwise." That afternoon, Patricia called with a hearing date, 48 hours. We were going before a judge in 2 days. I called my mother that evening. She answered before the first ring had finished, because that's what she did now. Every time. "Tell me," she said. I told her. All of it. The quitclaim, the $80,000, Tiffany's account, $114,000 total. My mother was silent for so long that I said her name to make sure she was still on the line. "I'm here," she said. "I'm just—" A pause. "Rachel, how are you not burning that house down?" Despite everything, I almost smiled. "Because it's my house, Mom, and you don't burn down your own house." She laughed at that, a short, surprised sound. "No," she said, "you don't. You take it back." Another pause. "Your lawyer, she's good?" "She's excellent." "And you have evidence?" "I have everything, more than I need." "Good." My mother's voice shifted then, softer, slower. "Your father used to say that the best revenge is making sure they see what they lost. Not anger, sweetheart, just let them see what they threw away." She stopped. "You are going to be so okay. You know that?" I sat with those words for a long time after we hung up. "You are going to be so okay." The night before the hearing, Aaron texted me again. This time it was longer than 4 words. He wrote, "I think we should talk before this goes any further. Things have gotten out of hand. I made some decisions I probably should have handled differently. Can we meet? Just to talk." I read it 3 times. I thought about how that message would have landed on me 2 years ago. The relief of it. The rush to interpret I handled things differently as an apology. The willingness to meet, to soften, to give him the benefit of the doubt one more time. I recognized the pattern of it. How many times over 12 years had he brought me back from the edge of anger with exactly this kind of message? Just enough acknowledgement to lower my defenses, not enough to actually mean anything. I forwarded the message to Patricia. Her response was immediate and short. "Do not respond. I'll see you tomorrow at 9. I set the phone down. Emma knocked on the guest room door and poked her head in. "You okay?" "He wants to talk," I said. Before the hearing. Emma's expression was unambiguous. "No." "I know," I said. "I know." She came in and sat on the edge of the bed, the way she used to do when we were in our 20s and one of us had a bad day. "Do you know what I keep thinking about?" she said. "That robe. That you saved up for that robe specifically because you found it in Nashville and it was the softest thing you'd ever felt and you were so happy when you bought it." She shook her head. "That's the image I keep coming back to, because it's so perfectly him, isn't it? The disregard, the complete absence of basic human respect for the person he was supposed to love." I thought about that robe. I thought about standing in the lobby of that boutique in Nashville, running my hand along the terry cloth, deciding to buy something nice for myself for once, carrying it home in the shopping bag and hanging it on the back of the bathroom door and feeling, in a small and uncomplicated way, happy. "Yeah," I said, "that's perfectly him." "Tomorrow," Emma said, "you go in there tomorrow and you let Patricia do what she does, and you remember that every single thing you are fighting for, the house, the money, all of it, is yours. You earned it. You paid for it. And no court in this country is going to let him just handed off to his girlfriend because he had the audacity to put his name on the deed. I looked at her. 12 years of friendship, anchored in the particular way that only the most reliable people can anchor you. "What would I have done without you?" I said. "You would have figured it out," she said immediately. "You would have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." She stood up. "Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." I lay in the dark after she left, and I thought about Aaron's text. Things have gotten out of hand. As though the $80,000 and the fraudulent quitclaim and the woman in my robe were merely things that had happened, weather events, unfortunate circumstances, rather than choices he had made with full deliberation over the course of a year and a half. As though I was supposed to meet him somewhere and receive his careful half-apology and agree to make things manageable for him again. I thought about that, and I thought about the calendar entry, Quinn, 8 p.m., quitclaim. And I thought about the look on his face when he had set my suitcase on the porch, that satisfied, prepared smile. And I understood something I should have understood years earlier. Aaron had never feared consequences. Not from me, not from anyone. He had gone through his entire adult life operating on the assumption that his charm and his confidence and the particular ease he had with navigating around the truth would protect him from any real reckoning. He was about to learn that they would not. In the morning, I put on the best outfit I had managed to pack in my 3-day suitcase, a dark blazer, pressed slacks, a blouse that said nothing I didn't mean it to say. I drank my coffee. I drove to the courthouse. I walked through those doors with Patricia on one side and Emma, who had insisted on coming and whom I had not argued with, on the other. And when I walked into that courtroom and saw Aaron sitting across the room in a suit I recognized, the suit he wore to important occasions, looking for the first time since Sunday, genuinely uncertain, I felt something I had not felt in days, something quiet and steady and absolute. I sat down. I folded my hands on the table. I looked straight ahead. The judge entered, the room rose, and we began. The judge's name was the Honorable Sandra Mercer, and she had the kind of face that gave nothing away. Not warmth, not coldness, just an absolute and practiced neutrality that I found in that moment more reassuring than any smile could have been. She was someone who had heard everything. She was someone who would not be impressed by Aaron's confidence or his suit or the particular way he had of making himself seem like the most reasonable person in any room. Aaron's lawyer was a man named Gerald Fitch, mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of attorney who relied heavily on a commanding voice and the assumption that the other side would blink first. He had that look about him, the look of a man who had won a lot of cases simply by being louder and more certain than the opposition. He glanced at Patricia when we sat down with what I can only describe as a professionally calibrated dismissiveness, the look of someone who had already decided how this would go. Patricia didn't glance at him at all. Judge Mercer called the session to order and asked both parties to state their positions. Fitch went first because Aaron's side had technically been the respondent to our emergency motion, and Fitch's opening was smooth and well-rehearsed. The property in question, he said, was held solely in Aaron Morrison's name. The deed was clear and unambiguous. The respondent had every legal right to determine who resided in his home. The petitioner had been offered a reasonable opportunity to collect her belongings. The emergency motion was, in his view, without merit. I watched the judge's face while he spoke. Nothing moved. Then Patricia stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform confidence. She simply had it, the way certain people carry authority not because they are trying to project it, but because it is simply the natural byproduct of knowing exactly what they are talking about. She laid out our position in 12 minutes. The 12 years of mortgage contributions from my personal accounts, the home improvements paid for almost entirely with my money, the kitchen renovation, the roof, the HVAC, totaling over $160,000 in documented expenditures. Then the quitclaim, the notary, the late night, the email in which Aaron had explicitly described the documents as mortgage refinance paperwork, the calendar entry reading Quinn, 8 p.m., quitclaim. And then, last, the joint account, $80,000 transferred to a third-party account the day after I had left for Cincinnati. Judge Mercer had been writing steadily throughout Patricia's presentation. When Patricia finished, the judge looked up and said, with no particular inflection, "Counsel for the respondent, your client signed a calendar entry identifying a notary visit as a quitclaim deed on the same night he represented to his wife in writing that the documents were refinance paperwork?" Fitch shifted slightly. "Your Honor, the calendar notation was, 'Yes or no, Counselor, does the calendar entry say quitclaim?'" A pause. "It does, Your Honor, but the context, and does the email your client sent to his wife on the same date describe the documents as refinance paperwork?" Another pause, longer this time. "It does, Your Honor. Thank you." She made a note and moved on. I sat perfectly still beside Patricia, and I did not allow myself to react. Because Patricia had told me before we walked in, do not show emotion in that room, no matter what happens. Save it for the parking lot. I kept my hands folded on the table and my face neutral, and I breathed, evenly and quietly, while the single most important conversation about my life was conducted 10 feet in front of me. Fitch recovered quickly, I'll give him that. He shifted his argument from the quitclaim to the deed itself, arguing that even setting aside the signed document, the legal title had always been held by Aaron, and that the petitioner's financial contributions, while potentially relevant to a future division of marital assets in divorce proceedings, did not override the current title holder's right to determine occupancy. It was a competent argument. It was, Patricia had told me, exactly the argument we had anticipated. Patricia stood for rebuttal. She cited 3 cases by name and case number from memory. I watched Fitch's expression flicker slightly when she did, that first small crack in his projected certainty. She argued that unlawful exclusion of a spouse from the marital home, under the circumstances presented, constituted grounds for immediate relief, regardless of the title status. She argued that the fraudulent inducement of the quitclaim left Aaron's sole ownership claim legally vulnerable, and that the court should treat the property as contested marital property pending further proceedings. And she argued, quietly and with devastating precision, that a man who transferred $80,000 of marital funds to his girlfriend the day his wife left town to care for her ill mother had forfeited any claim to the court's sympathies regarding who had the right to live where. Judge Mercer stopped writing and looked up at that last part. "The $80,000 transfer," she said. "This was from a joint marital account?" "Joint account, jointly maintained for 12 years, Your Honor. Transferred in a series of transactions over a single 48-hour period to a personal account belonging to a third party. And the petitioner had no prior knowledge of or consent to this transfer?" "None, Your Honor." The judge looked at Fitch. Fitch was already standing. "Your Honor, my client had every legal right to transfer $80,000 from a joint marital account without his wife's knowledge or consent to a woman he was having an affair with while said wife was out of state?" Judge Mercer's voice had not changed in tone or volume at all. It was still perfectly level. But something in it had shifted, something subtle and absolute, and I felt it from across the room. "Is that the argument you're making, Counselor?" The pause that followed was the loudest silence I have ever heard. "Your Honor," Fitch said carefully, "the transfer of funds from a joint account is not legally prohibited, absent a court order preventing. Motion for exclusive possession of the marital residence is granted," Judge Mercer said. She said it the way you would say, "The sky is blue," not as a declaration, but as a simple statement of fact. Temporary restraining order is also granted, preventing the respondent from transferring, selling, encumbering, or otherwise disposing of any marital assets pending further proceedings. The respondent is ordered to vacate the property located at, she read our address from the document in front of her, within 24 hours. The petitioner will be accompanied by law enforcement to take possession. We will schedule a full hearing on the quitclaim fraud matter and asset dissipation claim in 30 days. She looked up, and for just a moment I thought I saw something in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but a recognition. The look of someone who had just seen a clear wrong and was correcting it. "Anything else at this time?" Patricia said, "Nothing further, Your Honor." Fitch said nothing. Judge Mercer closed the file. The session was over. 41 minutes from start to finish. I stood up from the table on legs that were steadier than I had any right to expect them to be. Patricia turned to me with a look that was as close to satisfied as I imagined she ever got in a professional setting. "You did very well," she said. "You didn't react once." "I reacted plenty," I said, on the inside. She almost smiled. Emma grabbed me the moment we were through the courtroom doors. She had been in the gallery, observers allowed, Patricia had confirmed, and she had apparently sat through the entire 41 minutes with her fists clenched in her lap. She grabbed both my arms and said, "She granted it. Rachel, she granted it." "She granted it," I confirmed. Emma made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a laugh, and then she composed herself almost immediately, because she had always been better at composed than most people. "What happens now?" "Tomorrow," I said, and my voice was the steadiest it had been in days. "Tomorrow, I go home." I didn't sleep that night, not from anxiety. That particular flavor of sleeplessness was behind me. I lay awake because my mind wouldn't stop moving, cycling through the events of the past 4 days with the relentless efficiency of a machine that had been running at full speed and didn't know how to slow down. I thought about Aaron's face in that courtroom, the way his certainty had eroded over the course of 41 minutes, visible even from across the room, the first 10 minutes of polished confidence giving way to a middle section of recalibration, and finally, at the end, something I had never seen on him before. Not defeat exactly, more like the expression of a man realizing, for the first time, that he had fundamentally miscalculated. He had expected me to back down. That was the core of it. Everything he had done, the quitclaim, the timing, the locked door, the $80,000, the smug smile on the porch, had been built on a single foundational assumption: that I would accept what he had done, that I would absorb the shock of it, feel the humiliation of it, weigh the cost of fighting it, and decide it was easier to walk away. He had done his calculation, and in his calculation, I had not fought back. He did not know me at all. He had been married to me for 12 years, and he did not know me at all. I thought about that for a while, not with bitterness, with something more like grief. 12 years of being seen as manageable, as someone whose most likely response to betrayal was dignified retreat. 12 years of being steady and composed and careful, and all it had taught him was that I could be taken advantage of. My phone lit up on the nightstand, a text from a number I didn't recognize. I picked it up. "This is Tiffany. I think we should talk. I know that's probably the last thing you want to hear from me, but there are things you don't know about Aaron. Please." I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. Then I picked it back up and read it again. "There are things you don't know." My first instinct was to dismiss it. Of course there were things I didn't know. I had been discovering new things I didn't know every 12 hours for the past 4 days, and every single one of them had been worse than the last. My second instinct was that this was Aaron's move, that he had asked her to reach out, to soften me, to introduce some complexity into my resolve before tomorrow. But my third instinct, the quiet one underneath the other two, said something different. I thought about the way Tiffany had looked at me on that porch, that prepared, briefed quality I had registered and filed away. And I thought about something else, something I hadn't consciously articulated until that moment. She hadn't looked triumphant. I had expected triumph in the woman wearing my robe in my doorway. I had expected smugness, possession, the particular satisfaction of someone who had won. But what I had actually seen, and I was only now naming it correctly, was something closer to tension, a face held carefully in place over something more complicated. I stared at the text for another full minute. Then I forwarded it to Patricia with a message that said, "What do I do with this?" Patricia's response came back 12 minutes later, which meant she was either awake very late or very early, and I suspected the former. Her message said, "Don't respond tonight. Don't respond to anything from Erin's camp without running it by me first. But save the message. If she has information, we may want to hear it. Under controlled circumstances, with documentation. We'll discuss tomorrow after the possession order is executed." I saved the message. I set the phone down. I closed my eyes and didn't quite sleep, but I rested, which was the closest I was going to get. The officer who came the next morning was named Deputy Walsh, a broad-shouldered, unhurried man with a calm, professional manner who had clearly done this before. He met me and Patricia outside the house at 10 a.m. Patricia had a copy of the court order. Deputy Walsh reviewed it, confirmed everything was in order, and walked with us up the porch steps. He knocked, loudly, with the heel of his hand, the official knock that is designed to communicate that the person on the other side does not have a choice about what happens next. A long pause. Then the sound of movement inside. Then the door opened. Erin was in the same t-shirt and jeans he'd been wearing 4 days ago, or ones exactly like them, and whatever composure he had managed to reassemble after the courtroom had not survived the night. He looked exhausted and, for the first time, genuinely rattled. His eyes went to Deputy Walsh, to Patricia, to me. They settled on me. "Rachel, Mr. Morrison," Patricia said, before he could get another word out. "Deputy Walsh is here to execute a court order granting exclusive possession of this property to your wife. You've been served with the order. You have until midnight tonight to vacate the premises. Deputy Walsh will remain on the property while my client retrieves any immediate personal necessities. Do you have any questions?" Erin's jaw tightened. He looked at Deputy Walsh. "Can I—" "The order is clear, sir," Deputy Walsh said, in the tone of a man who was not going to have a long conversation about this. Erin looked at me one more time, and in that look, I want to be honest about this because I said I would be honest, there was something I hadn't expected. Not just anger, not just the wounded pride of a man losing a game he thought he'd already won. There was something that looked, around the edges of everything else, almost like fear. Not of me, of what came next. Of what he had set in motion that he couldn't stop anymore. Good, I thought. Now you know how it feels. I walked past him into my house. It smelled different. Not dramatically different, but different enough. A perfume I didn't recognize, layered over the familiar smell of the rooms I had lived in for a decade. I walked through the hallway, past the kitchen with its countertops I had spent weeks choosing, past the living room where the furniture was where I had placed it, past all of it, and I felt something strange and unexpected. Not just anger, not just the satisfaction of reclamation, but grief. A mourning for what these rooms used to mean, for the life that had existed inside them before I knew what I knew now. I went upstairs. Tiffany was not there. She had apparently already left, or perhaps Erin had asked her to leave before we arrived. I went into the bedroom and I opened the closet, and I stood there for a moment looking at the evidence of the past weeks. My clothes pushed to one side, the other side rearranged, a pair of shoes that were not mine on the floor. Small, intimate violations that were somehow, in their ordinariness, more sickening than the dramatic ones. I started packing what I needed, the important things, documents, jewelry my mother had given me, the small photograph of my father that I kept on the nightstand. I packed quickly and without ceremony because there would be time later for everything else. And right now I was simply establishing presence, claiming territory, reminding the walls that I was the one who belonged here. Deputy Walsh was in the hallway when I came out. "Everything okay, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, "thank you." Erin was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He was standing at the counter with a cup of coffee, and Deputy Walsh had positioned himself with the particular strategic casualness of someone maintaining visibility without being directly confrontational. Erin watched me come down the stairs, and his expression had changed again. The fear I had seen earlier had contracted into something smaller and harder, a kind of determined bargaining. "Rachel," he said, 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, without," he gestured vaguely toward Patricia and Deputy Walsh, "all of this." "No," I said. "There are things about the money that you don't—" "My lawyer will be in contact with your lawyer," I said. "That's how this works now." Something passed across his face, frustration, and underneath it, something that might have been remorse, or might just have been the performance of remorse from a man who was very good at performing the thing most likely to work in a given situation. I had spent 12 years unable to tell the difference. Standing in my kitchen with a packed bag and a court order and a deputy in the hallway, I found I no longer cared which one it was. I walked to the front door. I stopped with my hand on the knob, and I turned back because there was something I needed to say, and I needed to say it while I still could. Not for his benefit, for mine. "I want you to understand something," I said. "I am not doing this because I hate you. I did love you, Aaron. For a long time, I genuinely loved you, and I gave you everything I had because I thought you were worth it. And I think the hardest thing about all of this isn't what you did. It's that you never thought I'd do anything about it." I paused. "That tells me everything I need to know about how you saw me. And it tells me that I wasted a great deal of love on someone who never understood what it was worth." I pulled the door open. "Your lawyer will hear from Patricia by end of business." I walked out of my house. I walked down the porch steps. Patricia was waiting at the bottom, and she said nothing, just handed me a copy of the court order with a look that communicated more than words would have. I folded it and put it in my bag. Emma called 30 seconds later. She had been waiting in the car at the end of the street because Patricia had advised against a large group at the execution of the order. But Emma had come anyway and simply relocated herself to a technically compliant distance. "Well," she said before I could speak. "It's done," I said. "He has until midnight." Emma exhaled so sharply it was almost a laugh. And I packed a bag and I said what I needed to say and I walked out. I stopped at Patricia's car and leaned against it and looked at the house. My house, with its brick front and its azalea bushes and my porch swing that Aaron had installed back when he still did things like that. "Emma," he looked scared. "Good. I know, but it's also," I searched for the word, "sad. Not for him, just sad that we got here, that he made choices that brought us here." I stopped. "Do you know what I mean?" A pause. "I know exactly what you mean," Emma said, "and it speaks very well of you that you can feel that right now. But don't let it make you soft, okay? Not yet. Not until this is completely over." "I won't," I said, and I meant it. That afternoon, Patricia called with the update I had been waiting for. The 30-day hearing date was confirmed. The financial fraud case was moving forward. David had completed his trace of the transferred funds and submitted a full report to the DA's office. Aaron's attorney had already reached out, requesting a settlement conversation, which Patricia took as a very encouraging sign. "He knows his position is weak," she said. "He's going to try to negotiate his way out of the worst of it." What does that mean for me? It means we have leverage, real leverage. And it means that the next conversation about the house, the money, all of it happens on your terms. A pause. There's also the Tiffany situation. Have you thought about whether you want to hear what she has to say? I had thought about almost nothing else. You said controlled circumstances with documentation. I can arrange that. A recorded conversation, with her consent, in my office. If she has information that corroborates the fraud case or the asset dissipation, it could be valuable. If she's a plant from Aaron's side, we'll know quickly, and we'll have it on record. Patricia's voice was careful and precise. But Rachel, I want you to be prepared for the possibility that what she says complicates the emotional picture significantly. People in these situations often have their own version of events, and it's not always the version we're expecting. I know, I said. Set it up. Tiffany came to Patricia's office 2 days later. She was younger than I had processed in my shock on the porch. 26, as it turned out, not 30. She sat across from Patricia and me in a chair that she seemed slightly too small for, and she held her hands in her lap with a controlled stillness that reminded me startlingly of myself at 26, the particular composure of a young woman who is determined not to show how frightened she is. She said before Patricia could open the proceedings, "I didn't know he was married when we met." The room was very quiet. Patricia's recorder was running on the table between us. I kept my face neutral, and I let her talk. "He told me he was separated," she said. "He showed me an apartment, a rental. I thought it was where he lived. He never took me to your house, not for the first 6 months. He said the divorce was almost finalized. He said his ex-wife was keeping the house in the settlement and he'd moved out." She looked at me directly then, and there was no performance in her face, just a kind of exhausted honesty. "I know how that sounds. I know you probably don't believe me." "Keep going," Patricia said. "I found out the truth about 6 months in," Tiffany continued. "I found mail in his car with your name on it, our address, your address. I confronted him and he—" She stopped. "He had an explanation for everything. He always has an explanation for everything. He said you were technically still married, but it was over, that you both knew it was over, that the paperwork was just slow." She paused. I believed him, or I wanted to believe him, which I know is almost the same as not believing him, and I have to live with that. I looked at this young woman sitting across from me, and I felt something shifting in my chest. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but a recognition. She had been lied to, too. Not the same lies, not the same scale, not the same betrayal. What had been done to me was categorically different from what had been done to her. But Aaron had looked at this 20-something woman and made the same calculation he had made with me, that she would believe what he told her because she wanted to, and that her wanting to believe him was a door he could walk through. "The money," Patricia said. "The transfers to your account. Were you aware of where the funds were coming from?" Tiffany's expression changed. That's actually why I texted you," she said, looking at me. "About 3 months ago, he told me he had invested some money in my name for tax purposes, that it was a financial planning thing. He asked me to open a new account and give him the routing number. I thought—" She stopped. "I know how it sounds, I know. But he's very convincing, and I trusted him." "You didn't know the money came from a joint marital account," Patricia said. "I didn't know there was a joint marital account," she said. "I found out last week, after the hearing. He told me about the hearing because he had to, and when he explained why he lost, She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I pulled the account statements. I could see where the deposits came from. I could see the account they originated from. She set the envelope on the table. I printed everything. I don't want the money. I never wanted stolen money. And I don't want— Her voice broke slightly and she steadied it. "I don't want to be the person who helped him do this to you, even if I didn't know that's what I was doing." Patricia reached across and opened the envelope. She scanned the first page. Then she looked up at me. The statements showed every transfer: dates, amounts, originating account, our joint account, receiving account, Tiffany's. 12 months of Aaron's private financial architecture laid out in bank-issued black and white by the woman he had been lying to simultaneously with the woman he had been married to. $114,000. Every cent of it documented in Tiffany's handwriting on the cover page, where she had added up the total herself. I looked at her for a long moment. She met my eyes. She didn't look away. "Thank you," I said. It was not warm, and it was not forgiving, and it was not an absolution of anything. It was simply what the moment required, an acknowledgement of the things she had done, the choice she had made to walk into Patricia's office and hand over the evidence that would finish the case against the man who had lied to both of us. Tiffany nodded once. Then she reached back into her bag and pulled out something else. She set it on the table between us with the careful deliberateness of someone completing an act they have thought through fully. It was my robe, folded, still white, still with the blue stitching on the pocket. She had washed it. I stared at it. Patricia said nothing. Tiffany said nothing. The recorder continued running. After a moment, I picked it up. I held it in my lap, and I breathed in and out, slowly, until the wave of feeling that had risen in my chest had passed back down to something manageable. "We're done here," Patricia said gently to Tiffany. "We'll be in touch if we need anything further." Tiffany stood up. She looked at me one last time, then she left. Patricia turned to me after the door closed. She looked at the robe in my lap and then at my face. She said carefully, "Are you all right?" I thought about that. I thought about the past 7 days. The key that didn't work, Emma's kitchen table, the bank account with $412, the calendar entry reading, "Quit claim," Judge Mercer's voice saying, "Motion granted," Aaron's face on the porch, the house and everything inside it that was mine and no one else's. I thought about my mother saying, "You are going to be so okay." I thought about the document Patricia was already reaching for, the one containing $114,000 in evidence that would walk into that 30-day hearing and end this. "Yes," I said, and I held the robe a little tighter. "I really am." The night I slept back in my own house for the first time in a week, I lay in the dark and listened to every sound the building made, the creak of the hallway floor settling, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the familiar rhythm of a house I had lived in for a decade, breathing around me like something alive. I had changed the locks that afternoon. A locksmith Patricia had recommended, a quiet man named Roy, who had done the job in 40 minutes and handed me 2 new keys with the practiced neutrality of someone who understood exactly what kind of day he was part of. I held those keys for a long time after he left. 2 small pieces of metal. The weight of them in my palm felt like something I couldn't fully name. I was home. Aaron was gone. The court order was on my nightstand, and the new locks were on my doors, and the case was building itself around me like a structure going up fast, one documented piece at a time. Everything was moving in the right direction, and yet I lay there in the dark in my own bed and felt the strangeness of a life that had been entirely rearranged in 7 days, and I let myself feel it without trying to manage it, which was something I had not been very good at for most of my adult life. My phone buzzed at 11:43. Patricia. I sat up. Patricia did not text at 11:43 unless something had happened. Her message said, "Aaron's attorney contacted me an hour ago. Aaron wants to negotiate. He's proposing to drop his claim to the property in exchange for us not pursuing the criminal fraud referral. Call me in the morning, but Rachel, this is significant. He's scared." I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down and lay back and stared at the ceiling and thought about what that meant. Rachel Morrison, who had changed my locks while I was out of state and stood on my porch with that prepared smile and told me this was her home now, was scared. The man who had spent 14 months constructing the architecture of my removal was now trying to negotiate his way out of the consequences. I thought about what Emma had said. He has no idea who he declared war on. I called Patricia at 7 the next morning. She picked up on the first ring. "Walk me through what he's offering," I said. "He will formally relinquish his claim to the property and agree to the deed being transferred entirely into your name," she said. "In exchange, we withdraw the criminal fraud referral to the DA and agree not to pursue punitive damages related to the quitclaim misrepresentation. He would also agree to the divorce proceeding on irreconcilable differences, no contested fault." I absorbed this. And the money? The $114,000? He's proposing to repay it over 36 months. 36 months, I repeated. I know. He took my money and gave it to his girlfriend over 18 months, and he wants 36 months to pay it back. I know, Patricia said again, which is why I haven't told him yes. I stood in my kitchen, with the countertops I had spent weeks choosing, and I looked out the window at the azalea bushes that needed trimming, and I said, "What does our position look like if we don't take this deal?" "Strong," Patricia said. "Tiffany's documents are extraordinary. David's financial trace is clean and complete. The email misrepresentation on the quitclaim is essentially airtight. At the 30-day hearing, I am confident we get the property transferred to you, regardless of any deal. The criminal referral is already with the DA. That's out of our hands technically, though we can influence whether we push for prosecution or step back. A pause. The risk of not settling is time. Trials take time, Rachel. Even with a strong case, we could be looking at another 6 to 12 months of active litigation. More stress, more cost, more of your life on hold while Aaron's lawyers look for every crack they can find. And if we do take it, you get the house clean and fast. You get the money back on a timeline. You move on. Another pause. But you don't get to watch him face what he did in a courtroom. There it was. She had put it so plainly, so cleanly, that I almost laughed. That was the real question, wasn't it? Not just the house, not just the money. Did I want the satisfaction of what a courtroom could deliver? "Give me 24 hours, I said. I called Emma. She answered with, "I already know about the offer. Patricia texted me. Don't be mad. I asked her to keep me in the loop." "I'm not mad," I said. "What do you think?" A brief silence. "I think you should ask yourself one question. What do you need to feel like this is truly over? Because there are two kinds of over. There's done on paper over, where you have the house and the money and you never have to speak to him again. And there's done in the room over, where a judge reads out everything he did while he sits there and cannot escape any of it." She paused. "Only you know which one you need." I sat with that question for the rest of the morning. I moved through my house, checking every room, opening windows, making mental notes about what needed to change and what could stay. I went into the kitchen and stood at the counter and drank my coffee and tried to be honest with myself about what I wanted. Not what I was supposed to want, not what the reasonable, composed version of me thought she should want, what I actually wanted. And what I found, underneath the satisfaction of the court order and the strength of the case and the professional precision of Patricia's preparation, was something I had not let myself acknowledge until now. I was tired. Not defeated tired, not broken tired, but tired the way you get when you have been running at full capacity for days on adrenaline and anger and the pure mechanical force of putting one foot in front of the other, and the crisis has passed its peak and your body finally sends you the bill. I was 51 years old. I had been through the worst week of my life. I had won, not completely, not finally, but substantially and irrevocably, and the structure of what came next was already built. What I needed, more than the sight of Aaron in a courtroom, was to start building something forward rather than finishing something behind me. I called Patricia back at 2 p.m. "Counteroffer," I said. "Full repayment of the $114,000 within 12 months, not 36. The deed transferred into my name within 30 days of the signed agreement. He pays my legal fees in full, and the divorce proceeds on documentation of fault, adultery, and financial fraud, even if we don't push for criminal prosecution." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The fault-based divorce is going to make him push back. It puts his conduct on the formal record in a way the no-fault doesn't." "I know," I said. "That's why it stays in." "Understood." A beat. "Give me a few hours." Gerald Fitch apparently pushed back hard on the fault documentation. Patricia relayed this to me that evening with the tone of someone who had expected exactly this and was not remotely concerned by it. He argued that documenting fault opens his client to significantly greater reputational and professional exposure, she said. I told him that was precisely the point. And his client agreed to all terms within 2 hours. I sat down, not because my legs gave out, I was past that, but because the moment required it. Sitting down and breathing and letting what had just happened settle into the actual shape of what it was. He agreed. Signed letter of intent from Fitch's office in my email 12 minutes ago, Patricia said. We'll have the formal settlement agreement ready for signatures by end of week. Rachel, it's over. The substance of it is over. I didn't cry. I had done my crying in the first 24 hours, in Emma's car and Emma's guest room and Emma's kitchen table at 2 a.m, surrounded by printed bank statements. I had earned my tears early, when the wound was fresh and the outcome was uncertain. Now, sitting in my kitchen with the settlement letter in the pipeline and the new locks on my doors, what I felt was not the dramatic release of a dam breaking, but something quieter and deeper, the particular piece of a thing being genuinely, solidly, irrevocably finished. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, "for everything." "Thank yourself," she said. "You built this case. You had the documentation. You had the presence of mind to gather it immediately, and you walked into that courtroom with more evidence than I needed. All I did was point it in the right direction." I called my mother next. She cried. I didn't try to stop her because some moments need to be cried through, and this was one of them. She cried, and then she said, "Your father would have been so proud." And that came very close to undoing my composure. Very close. But I held it. I breathed through it. And I told her I would come visit soon. And she said she'd make my favorite dinner. And we talked for 45 minutes about nothing in particular, which was the most normal conversation I'd had in a week, and which I needed more than I knew. The formal settlement was signed 4 days later. I sat across the conference table from Aaron for the first time since the courtroom. He looked like a man who had not slept well in 10 days, which was accurate because he hadn't. He had bags under his eyes and a tension in his jaw that I recognized from our worst arguments, the held-in version of everything he wanted to say and couldn't. He looked at me twice across that table. Both times I met his eyes and held them until he looked away. When his pen went down on the final page, I felt something release in my chest that had been clenched since the moment I had stood on my porch with a key that didn't work. Outside the building on the sidewalk, I stopped and tipped my face toward the sky. It was a clear afternoon, the kind of day that has no interest in being symbolic, but manages it anyway. Emma appeared at my elbow. "Done?" "Done," I said. She took my arm in both of hers and held it and said nothing for a moment. Then, "What now?" I thought about it. "I want to go home," I said. "I want to go to my house and open the windows and order the worst possible pizza and watch something completely mindless on television and not think about any of this for one single night." Emma grinned. "I will bring the wine. Bring 2 bottles. We did exactly that. We sat on my living room floor because I had decided over the past week that the couch Aaron and I had chosen together was one of the first things that needed to go, and I had already put it out to be collected. Emma brought 2 bottles of red wine, and I ordered an enormous pizza, and we sat on the floor and ate it, and watched 3 episodes of a cooking competition show we had both seen before, and laughed at all the parts we remembered being funny. And for one evening, I let myself just exist in my house without the weight of everything that had happened. But that was one evening, because the morning after, I woke up and the weight was still there, as I knew it would be. Not the acute adrenaline-sharp weight of crisis, but the duller, more complicated weight of aftermath, the weight of 12 years being over, the weight of the anger that had carried me through the worst of it beginning to subside, leaving space for the grief I hadn't fully processed, the weight of being 51 years old and having to figure out what came next. I made coffee, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I let myself feel it, all of it, without managing it, without composing it into something more dignified than it was. I missed the marriage I had thought I had. I missed the future I had believed was mine. I was furious and sad, and strangely, underneath both of those, grateful. Grateful for Emma and Patricia and my mother, and the quiet, steady fact that when everything fell apart, I had not fallen apart with it. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize. Not Aaron, not Tiffany, not anyone in my recent history. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Is this Rachel Morrison?" A woman's voice, professional, slightly hurried. "Speaking." "Hi, Rachel. This is Donna Carver calling from Meridian Group. I'm sorry for the early call. I got your number from Kevin Walsh. I'm not sure if he mentioned I might reach out." Kevin Walsh was my division head at work. He had not mentioned anything. He didn't, but go ahead. We've been looking to bring someone on for a senior director role. Strategic partnerships, regional oversight. Your name came up in a conversation with Kevin and 2 other people I spoke with, and I looked at your track record and I'd love to have a conversation. Would you have time this week? I sat very still at my kitchen table. Senior director, regional oversight. This was 2 levels above where I currently sat. This was the kind of call that a week ago I would have processed through the filter of what Aaron might think, whether it fit the life we were building, whether the additional demands on my time were something our marriage could absorb. There was no longer a marriage to absorb anything. Yes, I said, I have time this week. We scheduled for Thursday. I sat with my coffee after I hung up and turned that conversation over in my mind. The timing of it, the particular coincidence of a door opening at the exact moment another one had finally, irrevocably closed. I didn't believe in signs as a rule, but I believed in momentum. I believed that certain chapters ended completely so that certain others could begin properly, and that the only thing required of you was to stay standing long enough to walk through the next door when it appeared. I spent the rest of that week in motion. I made appointments with a contractor for the renovations I had been mentally designing for years. The primary bedroom, the study, certain choices throughout the house that had always been compromises with someone else's taste. I went back to work and sat in my familiar office and found, to my surprise, that the work that had always been mine felt cleaner and more solid than it had in years, as though the clarity I had found in the crisis had cleared out not just the personal wreckage, but something in my professional thinking too. I was sharper, more direct, less inclined to soften things that didn't need softening. Thursday came. The interview with Donna Carver was conducted over coffee and lasted 2.5 hours, which I took as an excellent sign. Donna was direct and specific and clearly uninterested in anyone who wasn't prepared to match her energy, which I did without effort because I was operating at a frequency I hadn't been at in years. At the end of the conversation, she said, I want to bring you in to meet the team next week. I'll be honest with you, you're the strongest candidate we've spoken with. I drove home with the windows down and the radio up. The first payment from Aaron came in on the 31st day after the settlement was signed, a wire transfer, the first installment of 12 equal monthly payments totaling $114,000. I stared at it in my banking app for a moment. Then I moved it into my personal savings account and noted the date in a spreadsheet I had labeled very simply, Done. The deed transfer took 3 weeks longer than the settlement specified, which Patricia handled with 3 increasingly pointed letters to Fitch's office. When the final document arrived, a recorded deed showing the property at our address held solely in my name, Rachel Ann Morrison, I sat at my kitchen table and read it 4 times. My name, only my name, on the house I had paid for, lived in, loved and maintained and fought for. Mine. I called Patricia. She answered and said, before I could speak, I assume you got the document? I got it, I said. My voice was steady. Patricia, thank you. I know I said it at the settlement signing, but I need to say it again. Rachel, she interrupted gently, you were your best client. You came in with documentation I couldn't have built faster myself. You held your composure in that courtroom when most people can't, and you made good decisions under the worst possible pressure. Whatever you paid me, you earned it back 10 times over. A brief pause. Now go live your life. I hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of my kitchen. Outside, I could hear traffic, birdsong, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon. The contractor had begun the bedroom renovation the previous week. There was a certain dusty quality to the air in the upstairs hallway that reminded me every morning that change was actively underway, not metaphorically, but literally. Plaster and paint and new surfaces being laid over old ones. That was the week I had dinner with David. Not David the financial fraud investigator, though I would always be grateful for his quiet competence, but David Kellerman, a friend of a friend who had appeared at Emma's dinner table 3 weeks after the settlement, a man in his mid-50s with kind eyes and a career in architecture and the particular gift of listening without waiting for his turn to speak. I had not been looking for anything. I had been, in fact, quite deliberately not looking, because I knew that the worst thing I could do in the aftermath of everything was mistake the relief of kindness for something deeper. But dinner happened. It was good. He made me laugh twice, genuinely, not politely, the kind of laughing that surprises you. When he walked me to my car, he said, "I'd like to do this again sometime." And I said, "Maybe," which was more than I had expected to say, and he smiled in a way that was unhurried and undemanding and didn't require anything from me right then, and I drove home thinking about that. The morning my boss called to tell me Meridian Group had made a formal offer, 32% more than my current salary, director title, regional scope, I was in the middle of reviewing contractor bids for the study renovation. I set the bids aside and I listened to every detail of the offer, and I said I would let them know by Friday. Then I sat there in my study, which would, within 6 weeks, look exactly the way I had always imagined it, and I thought about the version of myself who had stood on this porch 8 weeks ago with a key that didn't work, devastated and humiliated, and locked out of her own life. That woman had not known in that moment that she was not being locked out. She was being unlocked. The door that Aaron had closed had not been the door to her life. It had been the door to a cage she had been living in so gently, so gradually, that she had stopped noticing the walls. I thought about the conversation I'd had with Emma on that first night, sitting at her kitchen table while she pulled out a legal pad and asked me to start with the house purchase. The way that conversation had moved from devastation to strategy in the space of a few hours, the way clarity had arrived not in a flood, but in one deliberate step at a time. I thought about Patricia's voice on the phone saying, "Your husband thought he had thought of everything. He didn't think of you. He had not thought of me." And that single catastrophic failure of imagination had been his undoing. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "How's the study renovation going?" I looked around at the blueprints and contractor bids spread across my desk. "Exactly as planned," I typed back. "I accepted the job offer this morning." Her response was immediate and entirely Emma. "I knew it! Dinner tonight, my house. This is a celebration." I smiled. I set the phone down. I turned back to the bids. Outside, I could hear Roy, the contractor, not the locksmith, though I owed both of them a kind of wordless gratitude, working somewhere in the back of the house, steady and purposeful. And then my phone rang again. I glanced at the screen and my stomach dropped slightly, reflexively, before I could stop it. Aaron. I stared at his name for 3 full rings. Patricia had told me, at the close of the settlement, that there was no legal reason I could not speak to him if I chose to, but no legal reason I had to either. Every practical matter between us now ran through attorneys. He had nothing to tell me that I needed to hear. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail notification appeared 30 seconds later. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I pressed play. Aaron's voice, quieter than I remembered it, came through the speaker. "Rachel, I know you're not going to want to hear this, and I'm not calling to renegotiate anything or make any kind of argument. A pause, a long one. I don't know if it means anything to you. It probably doesn't, but I need you to know that I understand what I had. I understand it now. His voice broke slightly on that, and I sat very still and let it happen. Let it just be what it was. "I'm sorry, that's all. I'm sorry, Rachel." I sat with those words for a long time in my study, surrounded by my renovation plans and my new job offer, and the evidence of a life being rebuilt from the inside out. I sat with his apology, and I tried to be honest about what it did and didn't do, what it was worth and what it wasn't. I did not call him back. I did not text. I did not send a message through Patricia. But I also did not delete the voicemail immediately. I let it sit for a while, because I am not a woman who throws things away carelessly, even things that have caused her pain. I am a woman who keeps her records, who holds on to documentation, who does not pretend that something didn't happen simply because it's easier. I was that woman before he married me. I was that woman while he was lying to me. And I was most certainly that woman now. Eventually, I pressed delete, closed the app, picked up the contractor bids, and went back to building my house. The contractor finished the study on a Tuesday. I walked in that morning and stood in the middle of it and just breathed. New paint, a deep, warm slate blue I had chosen myself without consulting anyone. New built-in shelves along the wall I had always wanted. The desk positioned the way I had always imagined it, facing the window rather than the door the way Aaron had insisted, because Aaron had always insisted on facing the door, always needing to see who was coming. I didn't need to see who was coming. I already knew. I was the one who lived here. I stood in that room for 5 full minutes doing nothing but existing in it. And I want you to understand that those 5 minutes were not nothing. Those 5 minutes were the accumulated weight of 12 years of small compromises being lifted, one by one, from the place where they had been quietly sitting. My phone rang. It was Donna Carver from Meridian. "We need you to start in 3 weeks," she said. "I know we said a month, but we have a partnership situation developing that is moving faster than expected, and I need you in the room." 3 weeks, I repeated. "Is that a problem?" I looked around my new study, my desk, my shelves, my slate blue walls. "No," I said. 3 weeks is fine." 2 days after that call, Patricia rang. I was at my kitchen table eating breakfast, and when I saw her name, I felt the old reflex, the bracing, the readying, before I reminded myself that the crisis was over. Patricia calling me now was not the same as Patricia calling me 8 weeks ago. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning. I have something I need to tell you, and I want to preface it by saying that your settlement is completely secure, and none of this changes anything about your position." A pause. Aaron was picked up by the DA's office yesterday afternoon. The criminal referral, the asset dissipation, the fraudulent quitclaim. The DA decided to move forward. I set down my coffee cup. Even without my push? The documentation was strong enough to proceed on its own. Tiffany's records, David's financial trace, the paper trail on the quitclaim. The DA didn't need your advocacy to see what was there. Another pause. He's been charged with financial fraud and fraudulent misrepresentation in the execution of a legal document. He was released on his own recognizance. His attorney has already indicated he'll likely take a plea. I sat with that for a moment. The thing I had decided in Patricia's office weeks ago was that I was too tired to spend another year in active litigation, that what I needed was to move forward rather than to stay tethered to the wreckage of what Aaron had done. I had made peace with that choice. I had genuinely made peace with it. And yet, sitting at my kitchen table, hearing that the law had moved forward on its own, without me having to push it, without me having to spend one more ounce of my energy on Aaron Morrison and his choices, what I felt was not exactly satisfaction. It was something quieter than that. A rightness. The sense of a world functioning the way it was supposed to function, catching up to a truth that had always been there. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "How are you feeling?" Patricia asked. She didn't usually ask that. It was outside her professional register slightly, and I recognized it as the kind of question people ask when they actually want to know. "Honestly," I said, "relieved. Not because of the charges, because it means I didn't have to do it. It means the truth was heavy enough to land on its own." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a good way to put it." I called Emma immediately. She already knew. She'd seen something on a local news alert, and she answered the phone with a tone caught between trying to be measured and completely failing at it. "Rachel?" "I know," I said. "Are you?" "I'm fine," I said. "I'm genuinely fine." That's what you always say right before you're not fine. "Emma," I almost laughed. "I promise you, I'm fine. I made my choices, and I'm at peace with them. And this is just the last piece landing where it was always going to land. I paused. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't feel like justice. It does. But it's not my justice anymore. It belongs to the process. I let it go. A long beat of silence. Then Emma said, very softly, "Look at you." "What?" "8 weeks ago, you were sitting in a parking lot in front of your own house because your key didn't work. And now you're telling me you let it go." She stopped. "I'm not crying. I'm absolutely not crying." "You're crying," I said. "I'm absolutely crying," she admitted. Shut up. The errand news cycled through our small social world the way these things do. A wave of texts from people I hadn't heard from in months, mutual friends who had known us as a couple, neighbors who had heard something, colleagues who had seen the news alert. Most of the messages were kind, checking in, offering the careful, warm language people offer when they want to show support without making assumptions. I responded to each one briefly and warmly, and without giving anything away that wasn't mine to give, which was, I realized, one of the specific skills that 12 years of marriage had actually given me, the ability to be composed in public, to hold the interior and the exterior as two separate things. One of the texts, though, stopped me. It was from Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had been standing at her living room window the afternoon Aaron had set my suitcase on the porch, hand over her mouth. She had watched the whole thing from across the street. I had thought about her occasionally over the past weeks, the particular helplessness of having been witnessed in the worst moment. Her message said, "Rachel, I have thought about you every single day since that Sunday. My husband and I are so glad you're back. If you ever want company or need anything, please know our door is open. We always liked you better anyway." I read that last sentence 4 times. I sat at my desk, my new desk, in my slate blue study, and for the first time since all of this began, I cried the kind of tears that aren't about pain. The kind that come when something small and completely unexpected turns out to be exactly what you needed. I texted Mrs. Henderson back. I told her I would take her up on that very soon. I meant it. The week before I started the new job, I drove to Cincinnati to see my mother. Not because anything was wrong, because something was very right, and I wanted to be with her for it. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, and she was at the door before I had turned off the engine, which was exactly like her. And she held me for a long moment without saying anything, which was exactly right. We had dinner. We talked until almost midnight. She asked me everything: the house, the settlement, the new job, David, especially David. "Tell me about him," she said, with the particular focused attention mothers deploy when they've decided a topic is important. "Mom, tell me." I told her. I told her that he was kind without making a performance of it, that he listened, that he had, over the past several weeks, become someone I looked forward to talking to, not because I needed anything from him, but because the conversation was simply good, and I had forgotten how rare that was. I told her about the second dinner, and the third, and the evening he had come over and we had sat in my new study, and he had looked at my slate blue walls and said, completely sincerely, "This is exactly the right color." And something in me had simply settled at those words in a way I hadn't expected. My mother listened to all of it with the expression she reserved for things she found genuinely encouraging. Then she said, "Is he patient?" "Very." "Good," she said, "because you need someone patient right now. Not because you're fragile, you are the least fragile person I know, but because you've just come through something that would have broken most people. And the right person for this moment is someone who understands that healing isn't linear and doesn't require it to be." I looked at her across the dinner table. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been this wise," she said. "You just haven't needed it this specifically before." I drove home on Sunday with the windows down, music up, the familiar stretch of highway between Cincinnati and home feeling different than it ever had. Not with the weight of what I was returning to, but with the lightness of it. I was returning to my house. My new job started in 4 days. My study had slate blue walls. My locks were new. My name was on the deed. I was 51 years old, and I was, without qualification, beginning. Monday morning, 3 days before the new job. I was reviewing documents at my kitchen table when my phone rang, and I looked at the screen and saw a name I had not seen in 2 months. Tiffany. I almost didn't answer. I sat there for 4 rings, weighing it. The memory of her in Patricia's office, the manila envelope, the robe folded on the table between us. I had told myself that chapter was closed, that Tiffany Marsh and I occupied no part of each other's lives, and that was clean and right and exactly as it should be. But something made me pick up. "I'm not calling to restart anything," she said, before I could speak. Her voice was steadier than it had been in Patricia's office, less frightened. "I just heard about the charges, and I wanted to, I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not for what I told your lawyer, I'd do that again, but for all of it, for not asking harder questions when I should have." A pause. "I know it doesn't change anything." "It doesn't," I agreed. Not unkindly, just honestly. "I know." A beat. "I also wanted to say, I watched you that morning on the porch before you walked away, and I have thought about it almost every day since, about the way you held yourself, like you already knew what you were going to do." She stopped. I was 26 years old, and I had let a man I barely knew reshape my entire life around his, and standing there watching you, a woman who had every reason to fall apart and wasn't, I think it changed something in me. Another pause, shorter. "That's all. I just needed to say it." I sat at my kitchen table for a long moment after she stopped speaking. Outside the window, the azalea bushes had come into full bloom in the past week, vivid and unasked for, simply doing what they were built to do. I had planted them 3 years ago, and they had kept right on growing, regardless of everything that had happened around them. "Take better care of yourself than you did with him," I said finally. "That's all I have for you." "I know," she said. "I'm trying." We hung up. I sat there for a while, not thinking about Aaron, not thinking about the settlement or the charges or any of the machinery that was still grinding forward without me, just sitting in my kitchen in the quiet of a Monday morning, 51 years old, with azalea bushes outside my window and a new job in 3 days and a study with slate blue walls upstairs. And I let myself feel the full weight of what that was. What it meant to have gone through the worst of it and come out the other side, not just intact, but clarified, scraped clean of the things that had been accumulating for years, the quiet diminishments, the managed distances, the practiced composing of myself into something that fit more easily into someone else's life. I had not known how much space I had been taking from myself until I had all of it back. My first week at Meridian was exactly as demanding as Donna had promised, and exactly as energizing as I had hoped. I walked into that building on Monday morning with the kind of focus that comes from having recently learned what you are actually made of, and the work responded to it. I was sharper in the room than I had been in years, more direct, less inclined to soften things that didn't need softening, more willing to say clearly and without apology exactly what I thought. By Friday, Donna had pulled me aside after a meeting and said, "You are exactly what I thought you were going to be." And I had smiled and said, "I'm just getting started." 3 weeks in, David asked me to dinner on a Saturday. Not Emma's dinner table, not a casual overlap of social calendars, but specifically, explicitly, just the two of us. He said it simply and without making it complicated, because that was how he was. "I'd like to take you to dinner Saturday, just you and me." I said yes. It was a good dinner. Genuinely, uncomplicated, unexpectedly good. We talked about his work, a restoration project on a building in the city's historic district that he was clearly passionate about, in the specific way creative people are passionate about work that matters to them. We talked about my new job. We talked about our kids, or lack of them, about our cities, about food and travel, and the particular freedom of being people in their 50s who had learned what they actually liked and were no longer very interested in pretending otherwise. At the end of the evening, he walked me to my car and he said, "I have a very good time with you, Rachel." And I said, "I have a very good time with you too." And it was so simple and so unceremonious and so utterly different from the managed, performance-adjacent quality that the last years of my marriage had taken on, that I drove home almost stunned by the cleanness of it. I called Emma from my driveway because I couldn't wait to get inside. She answered on the second ring and said, "Tell me everything." And I did. And she laughed and said good things and asked good questions, and we talked until my neck hurt from holding the phone. When we finally hung up, I sat in my car in my own driveway for another few minutes, looking at my house. My house. Brick front, azalea bushes, porch swing, with the lights warm in the windows, the way they are in houses where someone lives who wants to be there. 8 weeks earlier, I had sat in this same driveway, unable to go inside. I had sat in my car and stared at those lights and felt them as something being held away from me, something I had lost, something I would have to fight for. And I had fought for them. I had built the case and signed the documents and faced the courtroom and held my composure and made the phone calls and found, in the process, that I was significantly more capable of fighting for myself than anyone, including myself, had fully understood. Aaron had believed he was locking me out of my home. What he had actually done was lock me out of the version of my life that was making me smaller, and the door he closed had opened, on the other side, onto everything I hadn't allowed myself to want. I thought about my mother saying, "You are going to be so okay." I thought about Patricia saying, "You built this case." I thought about Emma at her kitchen table at 6 a.m. with a legal pad and a pot of coffee and the absolute, unwavering certainty that I had a fight worth fighting. I thought about Tiffany's voice saying, "I watched you on that porch, the way you held yourself." I thought about the calendar entry, Quinn, 8 p.m., quitclaim, and the email Aaron had sent about refinancing, and the $114,000 that had landed in his girlfriend's account while I was making mortgage payments and picking kitchen countertops and trusting the man I had married with every uncalculating, unguarded piece of me. I thought about all of it, and I thought about the woman who had stood on her porch on a Sunday afternoon with a suitcase and a key that didn't work. And I want to tell you something about her that she didn't know in that moment. She wasn't standing at the end of her story. She was standing at the exact point where it finally, truly began. I got out of my car, I walked up my porch steps, I put my new key in my new lock, and it turned the way it was supposed to, clean and solid, the way things work when they belong to you. I walked into my house, I turned on the lights, I set down my keys on the table by the door, a small wooden table I had bought for myself, for no reason except that I liked it, and I stood in my hallway in the quiet and the warmth and the particular peace of a house that is entirely and unconditionally yours. I had been locked out, I had fought back, I had built the case from a kitchen table at 2 a.m, with nothing but the truth and 12 years of bank statements and the unshakable understanding that what was mine was mine. I had sat in that courtroom and held my hand still and let Patricia dismantle everything Aaron had constructed with the clean efficiency of someone laying facts end to end until there was no space left for anything that wasn't true. I had signed the papers and changed the locks and painted the walls and started the job and taken the first careful steps toward a life that had no room in it for anyone who thought my love was something they could spend without consequence. I was 51 years old. My name was on the deed. My slate blue study was upstairs. My job was a promotion I had earned twice over. My best friend was a phone call away. My mother was proud of me. The azaleas were blooming, and the man who had stood in my doorway and told me I was not welcome here had discovered at considerable personal cost that the only thing he had truly managed to take from me was the last of my willingness to settle for less than what I deserved. He thought locking me out was an ending. It was the best thing he ever did for me. And that, I promise you, is the whole truth.